Is Ryan Walters the best DC in America?
You are Locked On Huskies, your daily podcast on the Washington Huskies, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome back in to another edition of the Locked On Huskies podcast. I'm Roman Tomashoff. That's Lars Hanson. He's site editor with Athlon Sports' Inside the Huskies. I'm the site editor with Huskies Wire. Thank you for making this your first watch or first listen of the day, as we are part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Lars, we got a really fun show coming at all day, every day today. We're going to talk about some of more of our takeaways from UW's offseason media day. It's probably the only time we're going to talk to the players, the coaches before early April when spring practices do open up. So we got a lot that we learned from that. We're very excited to share a lot of that with the everydayers. Talk about some injury updates because we learned a lot about that. Guys like Zach Durfee, Manu, Jayvon Parker, Geirean Hatchett, and more. We're going to dive into all those, but we're going to have a lot of fun with this. Jedd Fisch very confidently got on the podium and said, hey, from Ryan Walters' experience as a defensive coordinator, specified as defensive coordinator. I don't want to hear anybody talk about his experience as a head coach. It's valuable, but Jedd Fisch was very specific about his time at Missouri and his time at Illinois as a DC, said he's the best in America. So, Lars, Washington's defense was solid last season. Can it continue to improve under Ryan Walters?
Yeah, I mean, there's no reason to think why it's not. It's very on brand for Jedd because think about his comments about the 2025 recruiting class where he said, I want to have the best recruiting class. And they didn't, again, it wasn't the best, it wasn't the highest, but they didn't finish that far off in terms of you were still a top 2025 recruiting class in terms of the high school ranks. If you're aiming for, hey, Ryan Walters is one of, if not the best defensive coordinators in college football, so you're saying he should have a top 3 to top 5 defense. And let's say Washington goes from where I think Jedd said they were 28 in points per game to let's just say top 7.
Sure.
Like, yeah, again, so we're having it. You're still in the conversation. And by the way, if Washington has a top 10 defense, like that already, that's why Jedd says I don't want to hear about his head coaching record because he's being the head coach of a defense. And I think some guys, and we've seen this throughout the years, where and right as you were asking that question, made me think before Pete Kwiatkowski came to Washington, would anybody have considered them one of the best defensive coordinators in the country?
No. So I like where you're going with that. And Lyle, I kind of want to dive into the most important part of the defense that needs to improve. That's the front 7, defensive line to be more specific. Where I look at the front 7, I got to listen to, as you did as well, and all the other members of the media. But as I was listening to Jason Kafusi talk about Simote Pepa, about Tacario Thompson, and Taitaui Ungalole, and then getting to talk to Tacario himself, I was really intrigued by what this front 4, front 5 really is going to look like next season, because the more I think about it, the more I see the acquisitions that they made in terms of physicality, in terms of body type, in terms of not just production, where that's certainly important in terms of what Simote Pepa was able to do when he was fully healthy, and Tacario Thompson in terms of what he's able to do on special teams. Taitaui Ungalole has certainly the most production out of the 3, but I look at that group of guys and I say, if you combine that with guys taking a step forward, whether it be Bryce Butler, Illinius Davis, I'm really happy with what this group could potentially do because, of course, you're going to want an elite top-end defensive line, and I don't think that's what this unit is going to be, but I think it's going to be enough in terms of everything it brings to the table with experience and snaps racked up, and when I think about especially Simote Pepa, just in terms of to be good enough in the Big Ten, to be good enough to survive and not be so one-dimensional where, we look at that final month of the season when teams were just running the ball down the defense's throat over and over and over again. I think that's where we're really going to see some improvement, especially with the guys behind him, with Budel, Ukta, and Xe'ree Alexander.
Everything you said summarized in its strength in numbers. You don't have a Braylon Price per se. I mean, Zach Durfee could emerge like that, but given, coming off an injury after, dealing with a gnarly injuries, plural, because again, it was both feet. Last year, you're thinking about a guy who could, have high-end production, but you're not necessarily banking on it. But exactly what you said, where you have so many guys and so many options, and in a way, a lot of guys that in one way or another are motivated to prove themselves. Illinius Davis, in a way, is motivated to prove himself. Hey, I'm the next guy up. Jayvon Parker is going to, whenever he's able to return, is going to be able to say, hey, I'm still able to compete at a high level like I showed you early in the first month of September last season. Armand, same sort of thing where, hey, I was the better one in high school and nobody's seen me yet. And you go down the list and Ty where it seems kind of almost like overshadowed, maybe overshadowed is the right word.
Yeah.
But like overshadowed because like he had production in Arizona. So it's not like he couldn't take that Braylon Trice as step. Maybe he's not the same type of player. I'm not saying the same exact type of skill set, but just in terms of if he had, 45 pressures over 2 years, you got to think a fair number. I would put the over under at 29.5. I know that sounds a little high because, you're thinking as a mostly interior guy who has, could come from the outside in a certain package, but you're mostly thinking of him as an interior guy in that respect. But he's shown the ability to do it. So I'm thinking there's enough there to make it all work.
Oh, I absolutely agree. And that's the interesting thing about how this defensive line might work because, again, that's the group that needs to improve the most. And like, it's one thing when we talk about the upgrades that need to be made on the interior, where you said a couple minutes ago, strength in numbers, whether it be Bryce Butler, Linneas Davis, Omar Khan, whoever else that might take a step forward, Armand Parker, depending on how his recovery goes as well, where I look at all those guys and I say the depth that we didn't see at that position last season is there this year. You talk about Ty's pressure numbers as well. And I'm really curious to see how this pass rush rotation is going to show up at, now outside linebacker position where Zach Durfee, Isaiah Ward, Russell Davis, Jacob Lane, whoever else you want to throw into that mix as well, where I think it's going to end up being a really solid group where, maybe we'll see one or two of these inside linebackers. I doubt it, like an Xe'ree Alexander or somebody line up at that position. We might see it every once in a while. That's not something I would certainly expect to see, but I like just the way that this group has the depth we didn't see last season. I think that's going to be really important because it allows this top end talent that you have in the secondary, whether it be Tacario Davis, whether it be, Alex McLaughlin, who this group is really high on, McEllisteen, who we saw really impress in different points last season. If those guys can continue to develop and continue to improve, if you have the front seven that can just hold up and be, I want to say slightly above average, because I think that's good enough to get the job done with what you're able to do on the back end, that we could see this defense take the strides forward that it's looking for.
So I'm going to piggyback off your Xe'ree Alexander point. And I think the reason why he plays an impact is kind of what we have, suggested on the show, which was what was the problem against Wazoo? The only two breakdowns on defense happened when you had exterior pressure and not a soul up the middle. And you're talking about replacing two linebackers. Because again, as you mentioned, this is the front seven, not just the defensive line. The two linebackers in the scenario, potentially one, depending on how the defense is set up, whether it's Buddha or Xe'ree. Yeah, actually has experience with tackles for loss. So I think that's where he comes into play, where you want like multiple waves of pressure, knowing you still have five back at least in coverage. And that's where the linebackers can kind of go both ways, where actually told me like, hey, I'm confident in coverage, but I can also come up and make the hit. Like I'm able to do a mixture of both. And Buddha showed that as well at Wazoo. Now he's going to show it at UW every day. And so in that respect, like that's why you can kind of have them almost be interchangeable. And then Jacob Manu is just a bonus at this point.
Yeah, that's one we're certainly going to get to in just a second. The last thing I wanted to say on the matter is I'm glad that you mentioned that about Xe'ree Alexander, because that's something that Robert Bala certainly echoed. He's like, yeah, we love the way that he thumps when he comes downhill and does all these different things, where combining that with one of the things that Ryan Walter said is going to be a big time philosophy on his defense that we didn't necessarily see in 2024 was taking the ball away, where we didn't necessarily see a huge impact of that. We're having somebody like Buddha in the middle who tied for Wazoo's lead in interceptions last season with 3, where Carson Bruner also had 3 for Washington last year. I think that's a point that can't be understated, because this defense didn't necessarily take full advantage in terms of taking the ball away as much as it possibly could last season. And I think a lot of that was due to the personnel, was due to the lack of size and physicality on the defensive line, where it's a lot harder to do that when teams will run for 200 yards a game against you. So I think that's all really curious. But Lars, a couple of guys who can help that, Jayvon Parker and Jacob Manu, we got some updates on their status on Monday. which we'll get to right after a message from our good friends over at Game Time. Looking for tickets to your next big event, whether it's a concert, a comedy show, or a sports game, finding the right ticket at the right price can be a headache. But with Game Time Picks, it's never been easier. Let me tell you how it works. With Game Time Picks, the app does all the hard work for you. It curates the best deals so you don't have to waste time searching through endless ticket listings. I've been using Game Time Picks for a while now, and here's why I love it. The curated deals make it super simple to find great tickets at a great price. No more sifting through thousands of options. I recently grabbed a super deal for a prime seat, and I couldn't believe the value. It was a steal. The seat view is a game changer. Before I even hit buy, I can see exactly what my seat will look like in the venue. It's so reassuring. And the best part, you're covered with Game Time's lowest price guarantee. If you find a better deal somewhere else, they'll refund 110% of the difference. Plus, your tickets are guaranteed to be delivered on time with easy cancellation options if something comes up. We're going to make your next event even better. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, that's code LOCKDOWNCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest prices guaranteed. Lars, let's start with Jacob Manu, where this is a guy who he confirmed, Jedd Fisch confirmed that he tore his ACL against Colorado, where that was certainly, the hope, but we want to make sure that that's out there and the coaches discuss it before we, just goes as far as they come to continue to confirm that. So confirmed that was the case. That happened in the middle of October. He's not going to play during spring practice. That's out the window. So the plan is something he told me. I know he told a couple other members of the media is he's going to be just, taking it day by day, see how his knee feels. And the expectation is, or there isn't one. I think that's the best way to say it, because he told me everything's up in the air right now. My knee feels good is what he said. Maybe I'll be able to practice a little bit more during fall camp. If not, redshirting's on the table. And with all the depth that you have at that position, I don't want to say it feels like a luxury to get that guy back, because he's the most productive player in the room. He's got 217 career tackles. He was a captain at Arizona. The way he comes downhill and attacks against the run is a lot of fun to watch for a player who's a little undersized like he is. So real big fan of what he can bring to the table. The number one thing with him is he's somebody who is going to be a big impact guy off the field as well.
I would circle the Ohio State game. I'm just going to say that right now. And the reason why I say that is because, again, like I'm thinking October, November, December, January, February, March, should be ready to, get back on the field, see where he's at the start of fall camp, potentially. Then you give him the first 3 weeks or 4 weeks of the season, because the Ohio State game is the conference opener next season, this coming season. And so if UW goes 3-0 and you feel like you have an actual shot in that game, I think, and he plays, and that he makes at least one appearance, in terms of whether he's, and the coaches at that time also feel he's fully healthy to go. That would be a sign of like, hey, we're going all in this season. If not, because like you said, that it's a luxury. If you don't need to burn it this year, and you think, what, okay, we're 3-0, but we lost to Ohio State and we don't think it's going to be close. Or maybe let's just kind of just put on the back burner. We'll get him some 4 games this season so we can still redshirt, and then focus more on next in 26.
So I just want to play devil's advocate here for a second. One of your favorite things to do. One thing that, we put up a little YouTube short about it, put it on all our other social media platforms as well. By the way, follow us, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter, Locked On Huskies. We're there. We're updating with a lot of content that you might not always see on YouTube. This one is a YouTube short as well, though, where I talked with Geirean Hatchett when we were at Media Day. And one thing that he talked about was having a full off season and being part of the strength and conditioning program instead of just getting healthy, which I think is a really important part of that, where he is going to look a lot different this season, something you and I have talked about on the show, because he's got a full offseason to actually get his body right instead of getting his body healthy. So I think that's one thing that is just something to keep in mind. I don't want to say that I'm disagreeing with you. That's just something that I want to keep in mind for this particular situation, because it's something that I think can go overlooked at times.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I'm just going to put out my 2-0 record when I said Adam Muhammad will play all 13 games and Iman will play more than 6. I'm just going to put out my 2-0 record there and not acknowledge any other predictions that I may or may not have made at that point in time.
I will say you also did say that Geirean Hatchett was going to be healthy and playing all the games after Big Ten Media Day. So that one was more of, hey, I was told this than a prediction, but hats off to you. I'm giving you the 3-0 record. I'll give you that. We got to move on because there are a lot of the ones we want to get to. Let's stay in the front 7 here. Let's go run through all those guys really fast. And let's go to Jayvon Parker, where Jedd Fisch said that right now the target date to get him cleared is August 1st. And this is something I've seen, a lot going around on Twitter, on, just on social media in general, saying it might be the best option to redshirt him this season, where he was able to use a redshirt last year after only playing in 4 games. And with the Achilles, that is going to take time. Where that's one where, you talk about Jacob Manu and like, hey, let's see what this looks like, where we saw what happened when Zion Tupuola-Fatui tried to come back really quickly. He was able to play, but it wasn't, the same level of play. It took him a little bit longer to get back to where he was. So with an Achilles injury, if he doesn't play at all this season, I wouldn't be shocked because Jedd Fisch used the term hopeful when describing his situation, said, we're hopeful to get him cleared on August 1st, where that's about 9 months out from the injury. So that's one to keep an eye on. And with the depth on the defensive line, I'm just curious to see how they're going to handle the situation.
Yeah, I was as you were saying that, I was like, yeah, I would say you're hopeful to get 2 red shirts. I was thinking, well, last year was a medical red shirt. This year would be a true red shirt because he played most of his first 2 years at Washington, so he didn't burn his initial red shirt. So just to clarify, because when you're saying red shirt again after red shirting last season, like I know the NCAA, I forgot who I was talking to immediately, but I'll save that for the third segment. Because sticking with the point of the depth, like that's I think also why you still wanted to load up. So no matter what, there's no pressure on Jayvon saying, hey man, we need you back, like you're our guy, almost kind of like basketball, like Frank Kepner. It's like, hey, if we don't have Frank, we don't really have that much in the post. Like we do, again, great's good, but he's gonna get doubled every time, and 2 cancels at once, so you have nobody in the post, and that's no slight to Wilhelm. That's just like there's certain guys that you absolutely need. So the fact that they have that depth, and I'm sure when you talk to the Ontario, he mentioned he's going to be more of an inside guy. Yep. It sounds like he'd be that Deshaun Lynch, Voight Sanoop. He can play 0 to 4, like we mentioned on yesterday's show. So there's a lot of versatility. Same with Ty, where I think Ty can play a couple of different, could play inside or outside. Will mostly play inside, but does have the potential in certain fronts to play outside, mostly against the run. Just to clarify.
Yeah. Well, because I like where you're going with all that. I just know we have a whole bunch of other guys to get to. The last thing I want to say on Jayvon Parker, where I think you touched on it perfectly, is we saw him do that too. Where we saw him do that last season during fall camp. And it's really important because in that Ontario Thompson mold, he is a really good athlete for his size, and he can handle those different positions. So I don't want to say in the same vein as Jacob Manu, I don't want to say he's a luxury, because he's not. He's somebody who, if you talk to anybody in the media world, I'm sure that if you talk about defensive line, he might have the highest ceiling of anybody in the room. So that's somebody that you'd love to have around as much as possible. But with an injury like this, you want to be careful. So if he's not ready for the start of fall camp, that's not something I would be overly concerned about. And that's something where take it slow. Make sure that injury is completely sorted out and that he's fully ready for contact, and you don't try to rush him back, because you'd absolutely love to have him along that defensive line. But there is enough there right now in terms of depth that it's not, I want to say, the most overarching need to get him on the field ASAP. Again, you want to have that. It's not the number one concern right now. Last guy on the defensive line, Zach Durfee. Talked about him a little bit as well, where I'm not going to go into all the details of the injury, as he sat there with me and Christian Capel and described somebody just in the Eastern Michigan game, basically an offensive lineman basically tackling him while his foot was still planted in the ground, and how that just overextended his toe, which is how that happened to his left foot. And that's not even the foot that he had surgery on, which brings us to the main point that he told me the plan isn't for him to participate in spring practice as of right now. He's still recovering from a surgery he had in early December. And moving forward, he's somebody who's going to be a big part of this defense. He's somebody, obviously, both coaching staffs that we've been able to talk to over the last 3 years now have discussed his talent, his upside, what kind of athlete he is, and what he can bring to the defense. But right now, the priority is getting him healthy. And I don't know about you, Lars, but if the plan for him is to not participate in spring ball to make sure he's 100%, I'm 100% okay with that.
Yeah, I don't see a reason, this is no slight to Zach, but he shouldn't participate in spring ball. Whether I'm advising him or the coaching, there's no reason. What do you gain? He's a student of the game. He knows he can learn the scheme without having to go through a physical, literal practice. You can do walkthroughs and understand the scheme, but as the outside linebacker, he knows what to do.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. So last guy we got to get to. We're switching sides of the ball here. We're getting to the offensive line. That's Geirean Hatchett. He suffered a biceps injury, I believe is what it was reported as, at Oklahoma really early on in the season. He's coming back. Jedd Fisch said, and we kind of went from, worst and when they might come back to maybe best case scenario here, where Jedd Fisch said that he's hopeful Geirean is going to participate in spring ball with the way the injury kind of is. If he is back, let's just call it second, third week, I wouldn't be surprised by that. And the nice thing that Lars, that Jedd did mention during his press conference on Monday was you're not working with 7 offensive linemen. You're not working with 61 scholarship players like you had last year. You have more of an opportunity to get more guys reps. So for somebody like Geirean, who's going into his 60s, he is very, very experienced. It's a great opportunity to get Pocky Finau more reps, get Michael Watkins, Zach Henning, get those guys more reps with the second team, and do something that he said at tackle, whereas we didn't have guys that were pushing to compete last spring because there was nobody in the room. Now with all those guys there, everybody's going to get better because there's that competition atmosphere that he likes to talk about is really going to be at the center this spring.
Same advice that I gave Durfee just 30 seconds ago. Like, there's no reason for all the reasons, for all the players. Like, the spring is the time when we talked about this on the show. Which young guys are you going to focus on and play more than 4, 5, 6 games, or potentially every single game if they're all healthy this season? You're going to want to find out, can Zach Henning be a starter? And because Geirean can. Like, when you get to fall camp and you got to plug him in because neither one of the young guys prove themselves. Yeah. Then Geirean at full health is able to go day one of fall camp. Cool.
Right. Lars, those were just a couple of the injury takeaways we had from Media Day. There are a whole bunch of other ones we want to get to. So, Lars, one thing that was really interesting that I learned at Media Day from a conversation with Denzel Boston was we got into a conversation about Omari Evans. I asked him what it was like to have another just older, more experienced guy alongside him to help be a leader in the room. And one thing he said was, it's going to be really nice to have somebody else that the defense is going to have to game plan against. And he didn't mean that as a slight to any of the younger guys. He just said, it's somebody who has a whole lot of film out there. So instead of just being able to look at film and just say, that's the one guy who's coming back, that's who we need to game plan against, there's Jonah, there's all these other guys. And he got to Omari Evans. And one of the things he said was, he's not just going to play outside. He's somebody who's going to play in the slot a little bit, play inside out. And he compared him to Giles Jackson. He said he might have a very similar role to what Giles did in the offense. So just something to keep an eye out for there, where we had our buddy Zach Sanko on a couple of weeks ago to describe his skill set and the speed that he brings to the table, and having somebody who can not only take the top off the defense, but maybe catch the balls underneath and create yards after the catch like Giles was able to, is going to be really important in this offense.
So for everything you just said, I'm going to add to and double down on why I think DeMond's going to lead the Big Ten in total yards this coming season, because of what I heard about Kevin Green. And, asked Kevin Cummings about, just kind of the receiver room and the veteran presence that they were looking for. But he kind of was quick to emphasize, hey, look, Kevin is a veteran. Like, he's listed as a sophomore because he was able, just like Jayvon, to redshirt last season with the injury, lower body injury, as Nick Saban would say. It's probably Jedd would want me to say, just again, lower body anyway from the waist down. With that being said, that's the guy in the slot where, again, you can still have Audric, you can still have Rashid. This doesn't take away from any of those potential guys. But pairing Omari, this is what I brought up to Cummings when I said, hey, like, it wasn't a slight when I said you're looking for a veteran presence, because I mentioned that to Denzel when I got to talk to him. Like, hey, like, how do you feel as like the veteran going into your next full season as a starter, where, kind of like Rome coming back in 23, where it's like, hey, you had the year in 22, that was good, but you guys all decided to come back. Like, what do you, where's the growth? Are you looking to be a veteran leader and those sorts of things? And he was quick to say, like, yeah, it's great having Omar, but also, like, Kevin, and the fact that we all kind of have a little bit of different experience, but all still experienced nonetheless. Kevin doesn't have as much tape, which actually kind of helps Washington and Jedd, but has been around the game, knows Jedd's offense inside and out, so can help Omari pick it up quickly, even though they don't play the same position. Just having all those three veterans feed off of each other gives you that, I don't want to say that 23 trio, but that's kind of what you're thinking, where you have two guys, Denzel, who's kind of your everything guy, Omari is you take your top off the defense guy. And the one guy that we saw with DeMond that really cooked early in fall camp before the injury was Kevin Green. And so you think about that trio, that still doesn't limit any else that we talked about, the young guys, the freshmen in the room, Marcus Harris's, Audric being a sophomore, and Rashid and all those guys, and Justice Williams kind of being the enigma of the room. Just we haven't seen him coming off the injury as well. So there's plenty of talent. And so you look at like whether those three are your leading receivers or whether Rashid emerges or whether, it doesn't matter. There's so many guys there. Like that's why that receiver room is so healthy now.
So I agree with you. I want to stay on the offense side of the ball, but I want to talk about something that Jonah Coleman told me. That wasn't necessarily an on-field impact, but it was just a really, really interesting insight into how not just the coaching staff, but some of the players vet some of the guys that they bring on campus. And because I asked him about the culture and I asked him about what it's like to, fit in at Washington, or not necessarily fit in, but really become incorporated in the culture and become part of what they want to do off the field in terms of, just to be a pro, all these things that you talk about. And Jonah told me, we see if guys are going to fit in during their visit. Because I asked him what it's going to be like as a senior to just be a leader and help guys learn what the culture is. And he said, yeah, we do that long before these guys actually get on campus, where we see very early on if there's somebody who are going to fit in and going to be part of this culture. And it's really interesting when you bring in, Tacario Davis and a Taitayo Youngaloy and Jacob Manu, who have been part of that and are going to very easily be part of that transition, but bringing in other guys from every corner of the country, whether it be, Alex McLaughlin, CJ Christian from just polar opposite parts of the country, and seeing that these guys are all going to fit in quickly and how confident Jonah felt in that was really interesting, because it felt like, I don't want to say that the team was not on the same page last year, where they certainly were, but with the way that everything happened so quickly, having a little bit more time to just incorporate everything could really help this team next season.
Well, so again, man, there's so many things that there's a bunch of different takeaways that kind of just flew into my head as you were saying that, because it's because everything that Jonah said is validated by when I mentioned that Omari Evans, one of the only quarterback that he followed once he entered the portal was Damon Williams. Jonah, like you're talking about faces, pillars of the programs. Jonah's the heartbeat, Damon's the face. You look on defense, Prysock seems to be a big follow guy. One thing that also kind of in that similar mold that, as I've been mentioning on the show, that John Richardson is now the secondary coach, so not just cornerbacks coach. So the entire head coach of the team, kind of like what Jimmy Lake was way back in the day. But, 2014 to 16, 17 in that ballpark before things went awry. Where CJ Christian, when he came up on his visit, as I reported, no players were on campus. The players had already gone home. Jedd gave him the weekend off. So the only people Vinny was already off campus too. John Richardson was the one that met with him. And that's why I asked John Richardson at the podium when I said, how do you integrate things, with Taylor Mays being your safeties coach? Because clearly, Jedd wanted him as a full-time position coach, not just as like a recruiter, kind of more like what Hawkins was, where Hawkins was like kind of a mix of both, where now you're getting a former NFL player saying, hey, we want you to kind of coach these guys up, almost like you're taking Vinny, but giving more NFL pedigree to the position. Yeah. And now how does John Richardson, who, because Taylor Mays didn't recruit CJ Christian at safety, didn't recruit Alex McLaughlin at safety. So having that relationship, because I think that's the other thing that, theme of the show yesterday. Right, the one thing that Ryan Walton, I'm going to tie all this together, the cohesion of the staff, although they brought in 2 outside hires, really does seem to be strong. Where Ryan Walter said at the podium, I evaluated the staff and it seems like it's a really good group of guys, and it does. And I love looking at body language when guys are talking. And I went back and watched the entire press conference again. You could see all the coaches were looking at whoever was talking in terms of the coach that was talking. There wasn't one dude kind of just checked out like, oh yeah.
I will say one thing I did notice on that regard was very early on, Robert Balla was very clearly engaged in a conversation with a recruit over text message, right as they first got up to the podium.
I was going to let Balla off the hook, which I think is also why he took the far end. So I guess we'll peel back the curtain all the way. Balla was at the very far end. I didn't think he was disinterested. I not at all. He was preoccupied. I was glad you kind of put it that way. It's he looked preoccupied, and it's well, if he's here and he's also recruiting at the same time, I want to. What's funny? We gotta find who. If you're a recruit that watches this show in particular, and you were the one texting Balla, can you reach out to either Roman or I and let us know? Because I would love to know what Balla was saying, where it's hey, you're watching this later, we're going to talk about the importance of young guys and these sorts of things. You're going to be the next one up.
So let's stay on this note with the coaching staff and everything, because like that was very clear. Like we're clearly just making assumptions when it comes to what that looked like, but it's very obvious because it made me think of something we've seen now under both coaching staffs. But one of my favorite stories is watching Jamarcus Shepard do this over his 2 years at Washington, where during spring and fall practices there would be recruits on FaceTime, and he would just be on his phone like this, just showing off the background, showing off everything that was going on. And that was just one of my favorite things to watch when various coaches do that on FaceTime, like during a very early part of practice. I think that's absolutely hilarious. But it kind of leads into something else I wanted to get into with the coaching staff that I really loved, where Lars, there was certainly a lot of positivity around the hiring of Taylor Mays, just in terms of bringing the local kid home. But of course, the internet is always going to react as it will. And there were certainly a couple people where it's like, hey, he spurned Washington out of high school. Why does he want to come back? I thought it was great to hear from him, and great to hear him say, I reached out. When I heard that this job was coming open, I reached out to Jedd and said, I want to come home. I want to come back. I want to be a part of this. And, having his dad being a coach at O'Day is great. That's all really helpful. But seeing that he's still very passionate about the Pacific Northwest, wanting to come back and be involved in the region, I think that's something that should be taken very significantly.
I hate social media so much for the reason of just nobody care about context anymore. Like Taylor Mays didn't spur Washington. Put the context into it. Go play for Pete Carroll and play for 4 Rose Bowls in a row. Or go play for Tyrone Willingham, stay home at Washington, and in that 2000, mid to late 2000 era, and you tell me which one you're going to pick. I don't care what rating you are, whether you're a 3-star or a 5-star. You're choosing between those two. Like, I would question a recruit's judgment. Like, no, I don't judge recruits. But it's like if you're going to pick like that over USC and what Pete was building, at the time. You have a real good case, because like this is it doesn't close the door when you have relationships and then you go play and earn, add to your resume where it's like, hey, a local kid made good, now it's coming home. Right. You don't have to play here to come back. It's not like, hey, if you leave the state, it's not like JTT can't come back and still be welcomed by people. I mean, fans won't like it, but it's like, hey, won a national championship. Like, and also went Jimmy Lake or go to Ohio State and ball out. You pick them.
So I like everything you're saying there, because for me, it was just more the showing that passion for Washington, which I think is the number one thing that people really look for in a lot of coaches from here, where it's not, you're not always going to get people with ties to the Pacific Northwest. You're certainly going to get a lot of guys with ties to the West Coast, where Ryan Walters went as far to say where, it might have played a little bit into my decision that my parents live here in Seattle, but it wasn't close to the main thing. And he said that he tried to keep a lot of things from them just to not get their hopes up over the course of that conversation, which I also thought was nice to hear and just get that sort of insight into these guys making that decision. But with Taylor in particular, it's really cool to see, because he's somebody where this is his first position coaching job at any level, really. But I just like what everyone had said about him at USC, or if you talk to anybody, they say, yeah, that guy was a really, really impactful coach, and we wish him nothing but the best. And we think that he certainly is going to have a big impact, and it sucks to lose him, which is just a really important thing to hear from other programs. But with a guy like Taylor, and I think we got to end on this note, because we're starting to run a little long here. With somebody like that, not just on the recruiting trail at his position, but recruiting some of these guys to stay home, whether it be a Derek Coleman-Brewster, whether it be a, David Schwarzel, F.A. Ciale, some of the guys over at O'Day. He can certainly say, yeah, I had that experience of going out of state when the program was really, really down, but hey, it's not anymore. Now you have an opportunity to stay home with a program that has been in the college football playoff twice in the last 10 years, played on a national championship game 2 seasons ago. And that was, with a defense that really, really struggled. You can come be a part of what is going to be a much better defense with Ryan Walters at the helm to really put a bow on all of this. And I think that that's something that cannot be understated. And we're certainly going to have a lot more on that and so many other things as we always do. Lars, as always, thank you so much for being here. Thank you every day for tuning in. We really do appreciate your support. We got so much more fun stuff coming for you throughout the offseason. So please make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, whether that's YouTube, Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon Music. We're there. We're everywhere. We're updating this channel with new content every single day. So make sure you click that like button, click that little bell so you don't miss when we post a new video. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, drop them right down below in the comment section. And if you're audio only, please leave us 5-star reviews. It does help us out a lot. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you on Thursday.